Welcome everyone to today's webinar. I'm Taylor Ross with Becker's Healthcare. We will begin today's webinar with a presentation and we'll have time at the end of the hour for a few questions and answer session. You can submit any questions you have throughout the webinar by typing them into the Q&A box you see on your screen. We look forward to hearing your questions. This session is being recorded and will be available after the event. You can use the same link you used to log into today's webinar by accessing the recording. At this time, it is my pleasure to start today's webinar by introducing our presenter, Julie Forte, Director of Strategic Partnerships at Zolt Data Systems. Few people have the ability to move an organization from where it is to where it wants to be. Julie has been able to do just that and has been a driving force for growth throughout her career. With a knack for discerning what customers value, she's been instrumental in finding solutions that foster success and create strong ROI. Julie greatly expanded market share and profitability for a medical coding company by embracing innovation in response to challenges related to the shift from fee to service to value. In other roles, she grew an indirect sales channel by 535%. Led year-over-year growth for an emergency medicine startup, and helped triple the membership of a nonprofit. Today, Julie serves as the Director of Strategic Partnerships for Zolt Data Systems. By harnessing the unique data mining and predictive analytics capabilities of Zolt AR Boost solution, she develops partnerships that enable health systems and providers to realize more revenue, decrease bad debt, and increase operational efficiencies. At this time, I am pleased to turn the floor over to Julie to begin today's presentation.
Well, Taylor, thank you very much, and really happy to be here and to be able to engage with all of you around this idea of price transparency and our revenue cycle functions and how the two interrelate, how we're going to meet the challenges, and how perhaps we can actually find some opportunity and some silver lining within a regulation that frankly presents us with several challenges. So let me just start with how you found this webinar today. What we described for you is that we were going to go beyond price transparency and talk about how harnessing the patient's unique financial characteristics both drives satisfaction and improves your bottom line. And what we described for you in our abstract was this idea that across the country, clinicians seek to obtain a complete history, an exam, a diagnostic workup before treating the patient. In fact, no clinician would develop a treatment plan without really understanding the individual patient's medical history and their background and their comorbidities and what brings them to our provider today. Yet when it comes to billing, we treat every encounter the same. We walk through an line that ultimately leads to the patient receiving a bill. And often only when we hear from the patient, which is rare, do we begin to ask about his or her financial situation. But what if we flipped that? What if we completed a financial diagnostic of the patient prior to sending the bill? What if we actually did that prior to the encounter when we first engaged with that patient? How might patient-centric workflows fall out of that? How might an individualized financial treatment plan impact their patient satisfaction, impact our ability to receive appropriate and compliant revenue? And how might it help us in this era of price transparency and consumerism, where we see the patient seeking more and more information from us as a health system and a provider? So we've promised you that as you leave today's webinar, you will hopefully be able to assess your organization's ability to respond to the increasing uninsured population. You'll be able to leverage automatic screening of patients for insurance coverage prior to the encounter, identify opportunities and ways to intelligently segment your patients, and move beyond just propensity or likelihood to pay. That you might be able to discover the benefits of presumptive charitable screening and adaptive financial assistance, and explore innovative solutions that allow you to meet that demand of consumerism, positively shift your payer mix, and increase your overall average patient collection. So with that, let's dive in here. There is a wide volume of articles around price transparency today. This is just one of many. This was in Forbes by Jeff Gorick, and he suggests that he helps Americans demystify the financial aspects of healthcare. And I think we would all agree it is fairly mysterious how this all interplays, even for those of us who understand well the interplay between coverage and payer and patient and provider and negotiated contracts and allowable amounts and denials and appeals and all of it. It is quite mysterious how it all comes together ultimately in patient financial responsibility. He goes on to say that while a sound move forward, transparency as currently contemplated is a long way from solving the issue. We have started to crawl in what will be a marathon, and I would have to agree with him. And he describes the reason for these challenges. He says, healthcare pricing transparency has always been a challenge for patients who often receive treatments without a clear picture of what those treatments will cost. Recent initiatives by the CMS are aimed at increasing transparency. The end goal is to create a market where patients can compare pricing at different healthcare providers and make an informed decision about where they will receive care. Experts argue that transparency will drive higher quality, lower cost care for patients. But he asks, is it enough to make a significant impact on healthcare? And he goes on, saying that transparency isn't a silver bullet for out-of-control healthcare costs. He's found that there's a big difference between what a hospital charges and what a patient ultimately pays. Negotiations between hospitals, providers, and insurance companies complicate the pathway between a treatment's listed price and what shows up on the patient's bill. Unless a patient understands how their specific treatment and provider interact with their insurance company, there is no way to know what their final bill could look like. In other words, what you are charged and what you pay often bearing on one another. And this is where he says, transparency is a step in the right direction, but it's not enough if patients don't have all the answers to make informed decisions about their care. And I would agree with him. This is a conundrum for us in the revenue cycle arena. Often we don't know for weeks or even months what a patient's ultimate responsibility is as we deal with allowed amounts, denials, appeals, requests for more information, review of medical records, and then ultimately get to this place where we have distilled down to the patient financial responsibility. And yet we're being charged with this regulation that wants us to give consumers a picture of what the price will be for a number of procedures. And that in and of itself is an enormous challenge. That's not all we're facing. If we look at our environment today, we know that our payer mix is shifting. And it's shifting because of the vast number of individuals who have recently become unemployed. The Kaiser Family First Foundation published in April a overview of what's happening to the American family and then what is happening to insured status. And if we look at the average payer mix across the country, and of course this is going to vary by specialty, it's going to vary by geographic region, but we see that roughly 43% of folks have commercial health insurance, Medicaid around 16 or 15%, Medicare around 30%, other less than 5%, and uninsured 6.1%. Well, that was before COVID. If we look now, what we see in the Foundation's report is that between February and May, 21.9 million workers lost their jobs or left the labor force. Of those, 5.4 million became uninsured as a result. Previously, the most significant increase that we saw in uninsured adults was between 2008 and 2009, when 3.9 million non-elderly adults became uninsured. And what we've seen this year is more than 5.4 million. Nearly half of those are in 5 states: California, Texas, Florida, New York, and North Carolina. The foundation estimates that nearly 78 million people live in a family that experienced a job loss. Well, why is that important? Well, obviously we have more folks moving to a self-pay status, but also we have a population that's going to grow in health-related difficulties, because they are like 4 times as likely to delay or go without care because of the cost. So all kinds of downstream consequences here. This is just a visual representation. Everywhere that you see that really burnt orange, darker orange, those are states where over 20% of the non-elderly population is uninsured. Your payer mix is shifting, and not for the good. Additionally, you're dealing with volume challenges, elective procedures being declined. Just can you make it if you are a practice? A recent survey showed that 20% of primary practices predict that they may need to close within the next 4 weeks. According to a survey from Altran, the healthcare sector lost 42,500 jobs in the month of March. COVID is having an incredible impact on all of our lives, but in particular in our healthcare sector, as we must meet the demands of COVID with less overall revenue coming in the door due to the results of loss in volume and loss in elective procedures. If you are a provider, you are also facing a likely decrease in the 2021 fee schedule, as all of those who do not use the outpatient and office codes on the provider side will likely see a decrease due to the increase being afforded to the office outpatient codes next year. So as you are all like me, you look at this and these are not positive indicators. It is a difficult environment to operate in, and it makes me think of a quote by John F. Kennedy. He said that the Chinese used 2 brushstrokes to write the word crisis. One brushstroke stands for danger and the other for opportunity. And he was making the point, in a crisis, be aware of the danger, but recognize the opportunity. And that is what I would like us to do together today. There is a crisis in healthcare, and that crisis has been brought on by the shift to high deductibles and cost shifting. That really is what's driving this need for price transparency, as the patient has become the payer, as they are responsible for more and more of their health care, even when they are insured. They need better information. They need an opportunity to understand the financial impact of their healthcare situation. And so we both need a solution, and we need some true self-pay strategies. Not just price transparency, but how do we come alongside these patients whose responsibility is increasing? If we look at the data, cost shifting to patients has resulted in an average of 29.4% increase in deductible and out-of-pocket maximums. Over half of adults in America today would be challenged to handle a small-scale financial disruption of over $400. And if you think of that, nearly everything that we do in healthcare comes with a patient responsibility of greater than $400. Our traditional collection solutions are no longer helping us drive margin. And when you add to this all of the macroeconomic challenges that we've just discussed, everything is exacerbated. We know that 91% of uninsured and 56% of insured out-of-pocket expenses go unpaid. And the reality is that is simply untenable. for you as a healthcare system and a healthcare provider. So what can we do as we come alongside this move and this regulation for price transparency? How can we capture the opportunity here and both help the patient understand their responsibility, meet their responsibility, and ultimately receive appropriate revenue for the services that we provide? Well, I think the best way to do that is to harness the patient's unique financial characteristics. The more we understand about the patient, the better situation we're in to optimize the experience both for them and for the provider. And so some ways we're going to talk about doing that today: tools that help us to get there, demographic enhancement, insurance verification, insurance discovery, charitable care programs, adaptive financial assistance, and all of that comes together in dynamic workflow for claims. Our goal is going to be to eliminate the assembly line claims processing methodology, where we simply take that patient information, we dump it into our billing software, we spit out a claim, we deal with the payer, and then we go pursue the patient, and maybe even sometimes, unfortunately, litigation. We want to move away from that assembly line approach where every claim is treated in the same fashion. We want to look at each claim for its particular financial characteristics, but most importantly, look at that patient as an individual and how can we best come alongside them in a way that improves their experience and also helps us achieve our goal of appropriate and fair reimbursement. So our first area to talk about today is demographic enhancement and insurance verification. Well, why does this matter? Well, it actually is fairly significant. If we don't have the right information around the patient, we're going to have a very difficult time providing them with appropriate pricing information, and even more of a difficult time getting a clean claim out the door and getting payment both from the patient and their appropriate payer. And so currently, many of us either go through a clearinghouse function or manually verify who the individual is as well as what their insurance status is. And what I'd like to suggest to you is that we can do better. We can do better through tools that come alongside and automate this process, but most importantly, tools that come alongside and correct the errors that are natural to this process. And what kind of errors do we have? Well, we have patients who give us incorrect information. We have patients who forget their insurance card. We have patients who give us a partial address. We have patients who aren't aware they have insurance. We have patients who give us an old card, an old address on their driver's license. All of that incorrect information really poses problems in the reimbursement cycle. It causes costly manual labor costs, it costs delay, it cash flow, and there is a better way. When you use the clearinghouse function, you take the demographic profile that was given to you by the patient and the registrar, you send that off and you receive a yes or a no. Yes, we found that patient, or no, we didn't. Here's their coverage. And what I would suggest to you is that there's a better way, and that is to utilize a tool that is going to take that initial profile that you receive or that you intook and vet it and verify it, enhance it. Perhaps you didn't receive a date of birth. Through a tool, through a data solution, you're likely going to receive a date of birth. Maybe the address is only partial. You can receive a full address. Maybe they didn't give you your social security number. You can get that social security number. And when you do, you now have a far greater likelihood that the information you receive back in insurance verification is going to be of higher accuracy and of more value to you. So look for a demographic and insurance verification solution that is beyond a clearinghouse, that in real time is going to enhance the information that you have. Often, a really strong tool will do as many as 13 dynamic searches. So we go out with that basic profile, We now have a date of birth. We're going to go out with that. We got a better address. We're going to go out with that. We're just going to get better and better information. Nationally, we see an enhancement of approximately 55%, that the identity of the patient, the accuracy around the patient's demographic profile is enhanced by 55%. Here's a sampling, a random sampling of 12,500 uninsured claims from a national staffing group. 59% of the encounters received some level of enhancement. The next tool I want to talk about is insurance discovery. So often, particularly when the patient is coming through that outpatient door of the hospital, which we know on national average accounts for 40% of our admissions, really significant revenue dollars and lines of service to the hospital. Many times the patient did not know they were coming to the ER today. They don't have their information with them. And as a result, the registrar denotes them as being self-pay because they didn't provide insurance information today. But often that patient may very well have insurance. But if you don't have that information, you're going to be collecting after the patient. Self-pay population is going to be enlarged erroneously, and you're going to be missing valuable dollars. And in the area of price transparency, when that patient comes to your price transparency portal, if they don't have their information, you're going to have a very difficult time giving them an accurate picture of their costs. You might lose procedures in an era of consumerism simply because you don't have the right information around the patient. So there are tools that in real time will go out, search for insurance, bring that back to you. You want to look for a solution that will do such as look for retroactive Medicaid discovery. You also want to look for a solution that is going to provide a confidence scoring around with line. It's going to share with you how confident are they that this is billable coverage, whether it was primary, secondary, or tertiary. And you also want to look for a solution that does indeed segment for you the primary, the secondary, and the tertiary. Best-in-class tools will do this. They will also generally find active coverage on 20% of your encounters. What does that mean for you? Well, really important here, because when I migrate a patient who is erroneously identified as self-pay to Medicaid, Medicare, commercial, I'm receiving far more optimal reimbursement than what I'm collecting from the patient. Self-pay to Medicaid, about a 5-fold increase. To Medicare, about 10. To a commercial payer, 20 to 25-fold increase. I do apologize for my coughing. That is really significant. And again, this is appropriate, compliant reimbursement. The patient has coverage. You simply were not made aware of it through your inbound process at the point of registration, as the patient was taken in the ambulance during the pre-surgical environment. And it really does represent significant lost dollars. So if we look at an average emergency department across the country, they have an average self-pay percentage of about 15%, or 4,500 encounters. When we apply an insurance discovery tool that's utilizing that enhanced verification information, that's doing multiple dynamic searches in real time, often in emergency medicine, we will see as lift as high as 40% of the self-pay population having a commercial and/or government payer that is billable and appropriate. Just on the professional side alone, that represents on an annual basis for that 30,000 ED, over $500,000. Imagine what it does across all of your specialties as a healthcare system. Obviously, each of those has a different applicable self-pay percentage, but you have patients who have not provided their information, who may not be aware of their information for a variety of reasons, and you simply want to do your best to find that coverage in a seamless and easy way. If you are a private practice, I noticed in our attendees, we have a number of folks who are here from the private practice sector. In a routine payer mix across the country, that's going to be about a 10% self-pay population. For an average size practice, that's going to be around 4,600 encounters a year. Even at that lower billable charge of an outpatient average claim, we're going to see a lift of over $30,000 just from migrating folks who didn't bring their insurance information, who haven't provided that insurance information. In this case, on average, in a private practice for just a primary care physician, we're going to be able to migrate about 11% of the patient population that was previously identified erroneously as self-pay to either a government or private payer. Again, just a substantial lift. A side note here for those of you in the healthcare systems, part of the HRSA COVID-19 uninsured program, one of the requirements is that you must verify the uninsured status before submitting the claim. An insurance discovery tool will check this box for you. It's one of the few ways to truly check the box that the patient has given you accurate information. We know sometimes the patient simply doesn't, and the HRSA program is requiring you to verify that they are uninsured before you send that claim in. This is really an ideal and easy way to do that through an insurance discovery tool. Another tool for you as we look for this self-pay strategy to maximize and improve reimbursement is deductible monitoring. Real-time automated deductible monitoring tools exist. They create logic around acceptable filing windows for you as a healthcare system and provider. It helps you drop the claim surgically. We tend to have a goal of a certain number of arbitrary days. And as we have financial information around the patient, I can begin to surgically drop claims at the point that is most optimal given this patient's background and characteristics. One of those being the deductible. I want to counteract that shift from patient responsibility and costly self-pay collection activities. 60% of patients fulfill their deductible within 17 days of an inpatient or outpatient admission. Depending where I am as a provider or health system, if I monitor that, I can be dropping my claim after the fulfillment rather than before, and now I'm not having to go through the costly collection efforts to collect from the patient. So this is a tool that's available. It is a tool that makes a difference, and we move beyond that mindset of I've got an assembly line and I'm going to drop a claim within a certain number of days to I'm going to drop a claim at the optimal point to assure appropriate and compliant reimbursement. Here's where this really begins to make a significant difference. Insurance discovery moves the needle in a powerful way. The deductible monitoring really can move the needle for you. But what begins to get really exciting in this consumerism marketplace is being able to do charity care and adaptive financial assistance. What if the patient financial engagement could be customized in the same way that clinical treatment is adjusted to meet the specific attributes of the patient? If I have this financial diagnostic before the encounter occurs, at the time the encounter occurs, I now can have a real-time interplay between my programs, between the patient's responsibility. In a transparent environment, I can offer them both the true price and any assistance they might compliantly be available to them. And where this really becomes exciting is with adaptive financial assistance. The key premise here is that patients do not pay when financial assistance is insufficient, either because they can't or because they elect not to. However, if the amount of financial assistance is targeted precisely to the patient's circumstances, and that's the key, not just that you have a program, but that you have a program that is targeted to this patient and their financial circumstances, they are more likely to pay in full given their own behavioral and affordability characteristics. And their payment plan levels will help providers achieve the highest possible revenue. So here's how this interplay works. I have the information of an insured patient. I have their probability of payment. I have the price that I wish to charge for this procedure, that is our charge for this procedure, and what I expect to receive from the patient. And there is an interplay here. As the price is adjusted to meet the financial character traits of the patient, their likelihood to pay improves. Their likelihood to meet their responsibility improves. And so I'm actually billing smarter, not necessarily more. I might actually be billing less, but I am receiving more because the patient sees their ability to participate. They're not immediately put off by my ask. My ask is appropriate to their ability, and that has been based compliantly on the information that I receive around the patient, and therefore it meets the requirements for a charitable and discounting program. So what does this look like in results? In a study, AFA generated 83% per account revenue increase for uninsured patients and 22% for the insured for their responsibility. In other words, when I ask the patient for a specific amount that has been tailored to that pinpoint of their ability to afford and the charges for the procedure, I now am greatly increasing their likelihood to fully meet their obligation. And in fact, an 83% increase for the uninsured and a 22% for the insured around their responsibility. What ultimately is a doubling for the insured and a quadrupling for the uninsured. This has a powerful impact. What it tells us is that it's not simply asking for a payment plan that makes the difference. It's not simply offering a discount that makes the difference, but offering a payment plan and or a discount that reflects the patient's actual characteristics, their ability to pay. We're going to have a higher likelihood that we're actually going to receive that payment. And maybe by asking for less, we actually are receiving more, which is what we see in this study. How do we do this? Well, you've got to determine a baseline and your lift opportunity. You've got to swap your existing aid calculation for a mathematically enhanced one. You're going to move from a small segmentation of high likelihood to pay, low likelihood to pay, to a number of categories, a significant number of categories that really dive into where the patient is financially. The resulting determinations are operationalized over the existing infrastructure and applied consistently, just as they are now. So you're utilizing the same functions, but you're doing so with better information, with augmented segmentation, with better information around the patient, and a more surgical approach to the patient's balance and responsibility. In a large top 5 nonprofit academic center in the Northeast, these practices increase performance over a 5-year period by $41.9 million. The lift is extraordinary when you ask patients for a responsibility level that aligns with their ability to afford and pay for the care. Improved collections by over $35.8 million, while also reducing costs to collect. And then this solution incorporates the finding through the insurance discovery that saw an additional $6.1 million in insurance payments. So you can see how when we bring all of this together and we harness that information around the patient, we ask them to partner with us in a way that they're able to approach, we really do see a lift in our overall revenue. In this case, $41.9 million over a 5-year period. And this is, of course, a large academic center with all of the conundrums, challenges, political struggles that all of us have in our health systems. It can be done. It does benefit, and it absolutely is worth looking into. It's a powerful tool. So let's talk about how we bring all of this together. So I've done the insurance demographics. I've verified the coverage. I've discovered alternative coverage I was unaware of. I monitored the deductible, and I have a program for adaptive financial assistance where I am pre-screening either at the point of price transparency engagement or at the point of registration or procedure scheduling. And that is allowing me to reap the benefit. Well, it also allows me to do a little bit more. I now can create dynamic workflows around this rather than following an assembly line approach to billing and getting a claim out the door. I'm going to have if-then scenarios. If a patient is of a certain socioeconomic level, I'm going to migrate that claim into a retroactive Medicaid cycle. I'm maybe going to run that for 4 weeks. If a patient hasn't fulfilled a deductible, I'm going to route that through deductible management. I'm going to have chosen a timeline. I'm going to keep looking at that deductible, and I'm going to drop it at a certain point or when the timeline is exceeded. I'm going to look at things such as, because I have all this wonderful information around the patient's financial background, their behavioral economic profile, if they're really, really low and just absolutely not likely to meet their responsibility, I might move that off earlier to collections. Therefore, I might save on the percentage that I send out because I'm sending it out earlier. I'm getting a better rate with my partner. I also can see this person is in the window where they're very likely to complete a payment plan all the way through fulfillment. So I'm going into the payment plan sector. I can see that someone else actually doesn't need a payment plan. They're likely to pay in full today if asked. So all of this information around the patient that comes in that deeper profile of the self-pay analyzer that comes as a part of these tools, I now have the ability to move the claim into the cycle that is most efficient, that is least costly to me, both in labor and resources, and that results in optimal gain from a reimbursement perspective. So what are the foundations of a customized financial engagement solution? Well, I need to have that diagnostic financial analytics, right? I've got to have the tools. I've got to have the insurance demographics. I've got to have the insurance verifier. I've got to have a self-pay analyzer. I've got to have worked through my workflow. And then because of that, I have data-driven, evidence-based workflows that show me that making this action step is really going to result in a better circumstance for both the patient and myself, the provider. And then I need to measure all of that, right? I need to have a really strong business intelligence performance system that's going to provide me with the reporting and the metrics to be sure that those data-driven workflows are indeed the right step, right? So a foundational level, a customized financial engagement solution, when I'm really wanting to harness this information, I've got to procure tools. Those tools have got to be data-driven and provide me with evidence-based workflows. And then I've got to have the metrics around it to measure, am I truly being more successful? Am I truly achieving better gain? What are the benefits when I do that? What we see as we look at these tools nationally, increased provider health system revenue expectations. There is absolute lift like we saw with the academic center in the Northeast, seeing over $41.9 million in 5 years. Like we saw with just the private practice, seeing an over $30,000 lift, or the emergency department group seeing over $500,000 lift on an annual basis. We really see that lessened effects of systemic non-payment, lower collections costs, lower efforts in what you've got to do to collect from the patient. We see increased patient satisfaction. If you've given me a better perspective of what I'm going to owe, if you've met me in a way that represents me as an individual, you understand my situation, I have tangible evidence that you care about me. You're aware of my situation, and just like you were wonderful in my clinical treatment and brought a treatment that was focused on what I needed, you now have done the same in my financial treatment. You come to me in a way that I can partner with you rather than just beating me over the head about this bill or this responsibility that I haven't yet paid. And so what you see is just healthier financial relations between the providers and the patient and the payers, because we have better information up front, cleaner claims, we have a lower denial rate. There's all kinds of downstream benefit to getting the information correct from the beginning, to having the right information around the patient and leveraging that information to benefit the entire reimbursement process. So let's talk about what this would look like. In just a flow, I would start with that demographics, right? That very first point the patient gives me information, I'm going to be sure it is correct, and I'm going to enhance anything I might need to. I'm then going to verify their coverage. I'm going to go out and look for additional coverage through discovery. As appropriate, I'm going to monitor those deductibles. I'm going to look at presumptive charitable care for that remaining patient responsibility. How can I partner with this patient along the guidelines of our charitable giving program at our health system? Let's take this a step even further. I might do adaptive financial assistance, really target that financial assistance to the exact level that is optimized for that particular patient. And that's when I'm going to present a bill to the patient. And certainly these are key steps, and it can seem like a lot, but the reality is it is possible for all of this to happen in real time, simultaneously with price transparency. As you are building your price transparency solutions and you're moving towards providing information to the patient that really allows them to make an educated decision, these are the pieces of the puzzle that you need to give them correct information. You need to fully understand who they are. You need to fully understand their payer relationships. Who are the payers? What coverage do they have? And what is their responsibility? And once you know their responsibility, you need to understand their ability to meet that responsibility and how can you best partner with them. All of that can happen in real time in the background with a price transparency solution. And even without price transparency solutions, for those of you who are just on the provider side, you can reap the same benefits from having this unique, individualized information around the patient as you're walking through your reimbursement process. In a recent Healthcare Innovations article, they noted in the title, "A Revenue Cycle Revamp, Why New Transparency Mandates Will Drive Change." This is going to drive change within our industry. And I hope that you won't just recognize the requirements of the regulation, but that you will take this regulation and you will utilize it as an opportunity to have discussions around your health system, to talk about how you really can move towards giving the patient, the consumer, the information they need to make an educated decision In doing so, you're likely to increase the number of patients who choose you because you're giving them the information they need. That is especially true if you partner with them in a way that reflects their financial situation. You make it affordable and possible for them to take care of their responsibility. If you'll recognize this opportunity and retool and look at these kinds of innovations, it can and will improve both patient satisfaction and your overall bottom line. One of my favorite quotes is from Thomas Edison, and he said, "Most people miss opportunity because it is dressed in overalls and looks like work." I know that there are challenges in this regulation. I know that retooling your process from an assembly line to dynamic workflows will take work. But I really do see the opportunity and the benefit here, both for you as a health system and a provider and our patients. I welcome the opportunity to answer any questions you have around this. I've also asked James Zadorian to join us for the Q&A. It is his case studies that were presented from AR Exchange, where they've actually put these principles into place and seen real lift. So with that, I just thank you for your time today and welcome any questions that you might have.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie, for a great presentation. We actually have had some questions coming in throughout, which is awesome. And thanks again, James, for joining us on the Q&A portion. James Zadorian from AR Exchange. First question actually came in from Dave Burnworth. He wanted to know, the 5% of self-pay patients are likely to have seems unreal, given that most practices drill down pretty seriously when a patient is first seen in an office. How do you explain this? And this came from earlier in the presentation, I think around slides like 5 or 6.
Sure. So practices do drill down very specifically. Patient provides them. What I would share with you is the patient or the patient's guarantor doesn't always have accurate information. Sometimes in the case of a minor, they're unaware of coverage having been purchased by someone else. Sometimes they forget they have coverage. I mean, one of the most striking things to me was that just by the act of people receiving a new insurance card, we see an uptick in provider encounters and utilization. In other words, you send me a card in the mail and I go, oh, that's right, I have insurance, and I utilize it. And so we have personal dynamics where I come to an encounter and I may not bring all of my information. I may have forgotten that supplemental coverage. I may not be aware I meet the criteria for coverage. I think that's particularly true with the number of folks who've just moved from insured to uninsured. But what we find is that by enhancing that demographic information, having the best information around the patient, and then going out and looking for coverage, we do find coverage. And even in those practices where the group really feels like our registration clerks are getting everything from the patient, it simply is the case that patients don't always bring everything or provide everything, and errors in that process mean that insurance goes undiscovered.
Perfect. One for you, Julie, came in from Antoinette. I understand that patients should not give a social security number or a social security for security reasons. How do we get social security numbers when the patient declines to answer such a question?
So there are a great deal of data repositories. And so when you have a partner who provides you with a tool in that larger data repository, and there's regulation around this, you must be a healthcare provider to access this data. You've got to provide that information before it will be shared with you. You are able to get demographic profiles that often do include the Social Security number or even correct a Social Security number.
All right, we have another one came in. This one actually for James. How difficult or time resource consuming is it to set up a customized financial engagement solution?
Yeah, thank you. It usually takes, by the time we collect data from a health system or a physician practice, it really doesn't take, it takes probably about 2 to 3 weeks to kind of do the analytical work to understand what the economic abilities of those patients are, and then map that back to the expected revenue in relation to those economic capabilities. And then from that, we start building models in terms of what the optimal discounts or price points should be, or finance plans for each patient. And that takes collectively, Matt, about 2 to 3 weeks to go ahead and do that. And then operationally, we simply just take those algorithms and then embed them into the existing workflows. So if folks were to come in tomorrow to a physician practice or a health system, and we had did that work that I referenced a minute ago, the output, every patient would have a flag relative to his or her, idealized treatment strategy and adjusted payment plan or finance option, or even strategic discount to the extent they're eligible for one, and they would be operational immediately thereafter. And the whole thing sits on top of the existing RCM assets, so you don't have to, and works in an Epic system or Athena system, et cetera, so you don't have to go ahead and work out of 2 different systems. So it's about 2 to 3 weeks to go ahead and do the analysis, set the modeling, and then thereafter we're operational immediately thereafter.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim. A question came in from Stacy Robertson. I have found that private practice providers are reluctant to name a cash or self-pay price for services. Why do you think that is, and what do you suggest?
Well, I think that there's a lot of concern and misunderstanding around the regulatory environment and what we are able to do in discounting and not able to do in discounting. And so a provider who doesn't feel really confident in that is perhaps going to shy away from that. One of the wonderful things is that by obtaining the self-pay analyzer information and embedding that into your charitable giving program, your discount program, and making that public, you have met the regulatory requirements. The key is that if someone presents with the same characteristics, they receive the same kind of discount. The problem is not discounting without an established criteria, without treating each patient the same, as in taking them through the same process to come to a result that if I present with identical information, I'm going to receive an identical charitable discount result. And so for a lot of providers, if they're not aware of that, they've gotten very scared by False Claim Act and other items that are widely spoken about in compliance arenas, and those are important. But they were never meant to keep clinicians and health systems from partnering with someone who had a financial need. There is a compliant way to give a discount for payment immediately at the time of service, even just a cash discount. That has to be published. It has to be tied to the costs associated with collecting on a claim. It must be reasonably tied. That's just, I could give that to anyone based on paying cash at the time of service, and that can be compliant. Or perhaps someone meets the criteria for our charitable giving program, and we're going to walk them through that and come to a result. Both of those are compliant ways to handle discounting and give a patient a specific and clear price, provided you've got the information available to you.
Yeah, really quick, if I could just add to that, I appreciate the sensitivity on the physician provider side, but in all candor, it's becoming increasingly difficult not to go ahead and meet folks where they are relative to their expectation to have visibility into price. And, just an everyday consumer activity, going to the grocery store, going to, any type of transactional activity, it's impossible to really make a good decision if you don't have visibility into that. So more and more consumers are requiring price as a fundamental, right or literacy when they're coming in for their care. And I think the key to Julie's point is working through the mechanics of how do you go ahead and provide the right prices in a way that the consumers can afford them. And our bet is that, the health systems and physician practices that take that, as a core competency moving forward are going to be best suited to go ahead and compete, retain, and attract new business, and ultimately be able to understand what their consumers can afford and thereby work with them financially in such a way that you have a great financial outcome.
Awesome. Thank you both for commenting on that one. One comment actually came in from Baloo Thomas. Just wanted to make a comment, actually. 100% true about that insurance card in the mail. It's definitely validating, because I think we've all been there getting that card in the mail, or we don't know it's in the mail coming to us. Had a question in here from Donna. What has been your experience with Medishare or Christian ministry services as paying for services or holding patients responsible for non-payment?
So what I would share with you is that I am aware of them as a payer. They have unique policy provisions that their members agree to. And in a very similar fashion, if we have that information, we can find out the information around what they are willing to pay, agreeing to pay, and then get to a place where we understand what the patient's financial responsibility is. And then all of these same parameters apply. So a little bit different kind of a payer, but still the same kind of scenario, that the key is, let's make sure we've got the right information around the patient, find out the right information around the patient's benefits, and then determine how to walk with that patient through their responsibility.
Awesome. Thank you, Julie. A lot of questions here. We're trying to get through as many as we can, so please keep adding them. And just so you know, if we don't get to your question, we will try to find your email and email you directly with an answer. Another question came in from Dr. Brenda. In a scenario where there is a shift towards self-pay, how can we facilitate discount categories without affecting the revenue target? Is it advisable to cater to different financial category of patients at the same provider? How can transparency be catered to in such scenario?
Hey, Julie, do you want me to take a shot at that?
Absolutely. Have at it.
Sure. So when you think of discounting as a strategy or what we call right pricing, right? It does no good to assign a price or send out a bill if the patient's got a low probability of paying it and ultimately doesn't pay, and then you've got a whole variety of back-end collection, activity that ultimately doesn't result in much in the way of revenue, right? So the way that we suggest that, if you think about on the acute side, charity care or presumptive charity care, there's lanes in which patients fall into relative to their economic means. And those lanes, for those folks on the acute side, understand those are based on economics relative to family size and household income. And then you get a categorical discount relative to where you fit. What we've realized is that those categories are too broad and not really defined to the individual. So to answer the question very specifically, what you're doing is you're looking at your patient population economically as a whole. And then you're looking at the means and ability for folks to pay, and you're putting those people into these more tailored discounts. And the premise behind the discounting is if you're actually discounting someone, you have a greater chance of creating greater revenue. So it's a little bit paradoxical in that regard, but people will opt out and not pay for an amount they simply can't seem to afford, but they're more likely to pay at a lesser amount that's something that's within their reason. And as a result of that, you've got two options. From an economic perspective, you can bill at the full amount and expect zero, or you can bill at maybe a 50% discount and expect 100% of them paying at that 50% discount. So economically, it makes sense. And from a discounting perspective, you're simply using the same methods that are used on the acute side and the charity and financial assistance lane, and you're simply creating greater degree of precision in terms of how to define those categories, slotting people into those categories relative to their economic means, and then creating a mechanism for them to go ahead and meet those obligations either through tailored finance or a customized payment plan. And when you do that, you get back to those statistics Julie reported earlier, an 83% in overall payment, 22% on the insured, 83% on the uninsured. So it's really a tactical strategy that you want to put in place relative to meeting your patient's obligations and then getting the greatest degree of revenue confidence associated with it.
Awesome. Thanks, Jim, on that one. Another question, we're just going to try to hit a few quick ones here. There are quite a few pieces to financial optimization slide you showed. Are there solutions available that cover most, if not all of them?
That's a great question. And yes, there are. There are solutions available that bundle the demographic verification, the enhancement, the insurance discovery, the deductible monitoring, and then move beyond that even and get into the adaptive financial assistance. So I'm happy to share those with you in a dialogue privately. But there are solutions out there that are effective, that are cost effective, and truly it's amazing to me. You can get back all of this information in about 45 seconds. And so it doesn't in any way delay your clinical care. And it also works really well in a website. And, there are best practices to look at when you're looking at these solutions, but there are a number of solutions on the market today, and we'd be happy to help walk you through those.
Awesome. Thanks, Julie. And one other one here from Kelly. This is kind of specific on counseling, but it says, who pays counseling that is caused by CPS? She has raised grandkids, and now they are put back with, it looks like a parent possibly. She wants to know who would actually be paying that counseling caused by CPS. Who would be, do we have an answer for that one by chance?
So that's a little bit beyond your general insurance benefits. If the patient's care is met medical health provision of coverage, then the coverage would cover it. For example, if the patient has a diagnosis of anxiety, depression, and you have mental health coverage, then likely the payer would provide for that. Otherwise, it's like everything else. If your insurance plan does not cover that in the benefits overview, then it would be an out-of-pocket expense for the patient's guarantor, unfortunately. Now, that's the best information I can give you around that one. And apologize for that difficult situation. That's very hard.
Yeah. It looks like I believe we're out of time on that. So Taylor, I'm going to send it back over to you to kind of close us up.
Thank you so much. I want to thank Julie for your excellent presentation and Zolt for sponsoring today's webinar. I hope you enjoy the rest of your day, and we look forward to having you join us for future events and webinars. Thank you.
Thank you.